who I think you've joined us. You've joined us now. I hope I'm getting your name right. Guangming Ling?
Yes.
Have I got that right? Great. And you're joining us from the Educational Testing Service, where you're a managing senior research scientist. And today, I think you're going to be talking to us about using learning analytics to better understand international students.
Thank you for the introduction. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet you virtually in this conference. Today, I'm going to talk some recent explorations we had about using learning analytics to better understand international students' application decision-making process when they're applying for the undergraduate colleges and the university in the US. And this is a teamwork. We have many colleagues from ETS joined the effort, and one of them has also now joined one of the universities in China before we finish some initial findings of the study. So without further ado, I'm going to move ahead. So this presentation is mainly going to start with some background and also introduce the question of interest. And then we're going to highlight some of the key findings. And then we're going to talk about some previous research in relation to this exploration and some brief introduction about the methodology part. And then we're going to have some deep dive about some of the findings. And then it's going to be ended with some discussions and future research. And if you have any questions, I've got what's the format. Feel free to, I don't know whether you can voice out or not, just to put in the text, it's fine. And when I finish, I will be able to take a look. And I think the organizer is going to also help us to monitor those questions, right?
That's right, yes. If people can just put questions in the chat and we will pick them up at the end, if that works for you.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. So a little bit background, in the last few decades, especially after 2000, the globalization of the economy and has led to the exponential increase of international students in different countries, where US is probably one of the major stakeholders where they host most of the international student traffic. As a result of that, international students' applications to the US-based colleges and universities also increased dramatically if you look at the IES or Open Doors data. When international students apply for colleges, and a lot of them are also applying for graduate schools, they have additional factors to be considered beyond those typically considered by domestic students. For example, the social, geographical, political environment, whether the local atmosphere or culture has a welcoming attitude toward international students, generally speaking, or toward a particular subculture. And however, there are still limited research and support in terms of facilitating and smoothing the application process, not even talk about the in-school adaptation and adjustment process, had it coming from a very different culture from the US culture. There are several questions that are of general interest for this exploration. One is, what are the application behaviors of international students to the US higher education and institutions? Second is, we were thinking, anything we could utilize based on answer of the first question, can be utilized to improve the process of application and admissions for international students, as well as institutions. Here we have two types of stakeholders. One is the individual students, their parents, their own guardians. The other part is the institutional side. They also may face some challenges as well as the population increases continually. So there are several earlier research and many studies of them was more around the domestic, US-based domestic students applications, where they were mostly focusing on individual institutions. without being able to generalize to similar institutions or very different types of institutions by the size, control type, and all kinds of other factors. And a lot of these research, some of them was focusing on the factors affecting international students' applications based on one or two individual institutions in the previous research. As you can see from the reference list, a lot of them was after 2010. So in this research, we mostly benefit from the use of TOEFL IBT, which is a test of English as foreign language, internet-based assessment of students' academic English skills that is typically required for K-12 or college setting, how to learn in English. And this TOEFL IBT data has millions of test takers each year, and it provides a large mechanism of resources that to help us to answer the two questions. And since this is more like an exploratory study, we started with, we handpicked about 18 institutions, which ranked about 30 to 150s in the US News ranking of 19. And we only extracted data who sent any one of their scores to these 18 institutions. And each institution and individuals will have their demographic background information, their test scores, including IBT, and also their intended institutions who will receive their test scores. And we utilize the multiple methods. Some frequency or descriptive analysis is certainly helpful for us to pinpoint certain distributions and features of a particular country. We also use some more fancy machine learning methods like multi-level bi-clustering methods and also topic models approach. And for this presentation, I'm going to be mainly showing you some results from the descriptive and the multi-level bi-clustering results. Some executive summary about the key findings. First, we found that international students' application patterns differ by age, by their country of origin, and also by the TOEFL score, and also number of institutions varied. Most of students sent their scores within a few months after they took the test of the TOEFL IBT, and individuals intending institutions appear to be stable across time. We knew that from many countries, students tend to take the same test multiple times. In one case, maybe they were not doing super well in one of the occasion, and then they will try to see to capitalize their performance, to give them some advantages in application. And so we also singled out those students to see whether across multiple times when they took the test, if the intended institutions they are interested to apply also stays similar. And lastly, we found that institutions can be grouped in latent clusters, where many students are more likely to apply to the same in-cluster institutions than those outside cluster institutions, which could help us to build some more real-time based recommendation system purely based on their preferences or background profiles, similar to when you go to Amazon making shopping list, and they already have figured out some good algorithm to make recommendations. If you buy this book, they will also tell you, people buy this book also tend to buy that book as well. So similar to that, in that case, can inform students' choices of institutions. So how did we get there? So first, we selected about 200,000 individuals and their score reports records based on the TOEFL IBT in 2017. And this is already a few years old, but since not much has been done in this line of research, so we thought it might be good to start to try that. And we were specifically focusing on undergraduate international students only. Most of them, 90% of them, is between 16 and 22 years old. Each individual record, each individual student has their test scores and the related dates. For example, when they took the test, when they made the score request, and when the score request was completed and sending to the institution. their demographic information, for example, country of origin, gender, and some of the indicators of the parental educational level. And all these questions are optional, so it will depending on how large or how high the response rate are to kind of disentangle these demographic information. And we also have their score reports and also responses to some basic background information questionnaires. For example, why they took the test and how long they have been studying English, how long they have been preparing for this application, and so on. So some results. So this is something we kind of highlight them in a map of the Earth, by countries, and the first to your right, to your left side of the screen is the test takers' percentage sending scores to the U.S. and the lighter color it is, more colorful, means they have higher percent of students sending scores directly to the U.S. institutions. The right side are the percent of test takers that are aiming at study at the undergraduate level. And similarly, the more colorful, the more green or yellowish the color, the higher percentage of students sending scores there. So these two pictures provide some overarching idea about where the students are coming from. We can see from both charts that in Africa and Asia and Eastern Europe, they have a lot of students, and some of the areas in South America also have a small percentage of students there as well. And we also look at the number of score senders by these 18 institutions. So we have, if you look at the left side of this page, they have the distribution of the 18 institutions from more selective universities like UIUC, UCI, to less selective like University of Tennessee and SUNY Oswego. And you can see the number of applicants is varied greatly, from 12, 13,000 students to a few dozens of them. And in the right side, we also looked into the requirement of TOEFL scores by these institutions, analogous to the current ongoing momentum of test optional by many institutions due to the COVID. There are 4 different categories: required, recommended, considered but not required, and or neither required or recommended, like we do in their website. And as I need to point it out, even though this can be considered as a broader category of test flexible requirement in terms of language skills, and many of them also have their own placement procedure. And if your language skills is not good enough, you will have to spend a little bit longer time there, try to sharpen your skills first before you can attend to the degree-oriented classes as well. So this shows some variations here. And next we look at the native countries, the country of origin of the students distribution by percentage. And as you can see, the top 5 country of origins are China, India, Iran, and South Korea and Taiwan. And you can see from all these blue bars, China seems dominant with most of these institutions, except for SUNY Oswego, where it has relatively smaller percentage. But everyone else has at least 2/3 of the population of that school who applied to that school. And then with Indian, if we look into the orange bar next to the blue one, it also varies significantly. For example, SUNY Oswego has relatively higher percentage of Indian students. The next one is ASU, and then University of Kansas. So this is quite interesting and shows, even though there are general patterns here, but they also seems to have a lot of variation across the institutions depending on their selectivity and control type. This is looking at the senders' TOEFL score distribution. The vertical bar here, the kind of light orangish color, are typically the 100 points or typically the cut score for most of the institution. As you can see, more selective universities such as UCI and UIUC, they tend to have higher, more skewed, the distribution is more skewed towards the higher points. And SUNY Oswego and University of Kansas, for example, they also tilt towards the negative side. And one thing I want to single out ASU, even though it's one of those flagship state university, and because they have a strong ESL program, so their average score of TOEFL is relatively low compared to other similar universities. And so we are also interested to understand, how many institutions individual students applied, given these 18 institutions. And here we were able to categorize the number of institution students that applied by 3 categories, 1 to 4 institutions, 5 to 10 institutions, or 10 plus institutions. And we can see that, for Arizona State University, SUNY Oswego, University of Kansas, they have more students, seems more determined, where they only apply to 1 to 4 institutions, with most of the students, more than 40%, applied to only 1 to 4 in terms of number of institutions. And the other extreme is, Duke, Penn State, Purdue, Syracuse, which is a private one, UCI, UCLA, UC Santa Cruz, and UIUC, Michigan, and also UNC. They tend to have students apply to more than 10 institutions, most of them. And a lot of them are pretty selective universities, around 50 or 50 to 70, based on the US students rank. And in the middle, we have Rutgers, Michigan State University, Iowa, Oregon, and Tennessee, where the students, most of them applied to 5 to 10 institutions. So these institutions are quite interesting and provide an angle, whether we can cluster these institutions by the number of institutions students sent to, if we are following a bi-clustering idea. And then we look into the timeline for taking TOEFL, and also when they start to send out scores. This is a table illustrating how these factors playing a role logically following the time table. And so what we did is we categorize all the distance between when you took the test versus when you request the scores to be sent to institutions. We categorize it into 4 different categories, including less than 3 months, up to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, and 12 to 24 months, so 2 years. And we also have a few cases where they don't have any score reports sent. Otherwise, in other words, they took the test, but they didn't have a interesting reporting the score to any place. What we found is more than 60% of the students requested their score within 3 months of their test-taking behavior, with the exception for Duke, University, UNC applicants, or ASU applicants, and UCI applicants. And less than 10% requested of the score sent when they register. And there are a small hike between 6 months and 12 months in terms of the proportion of students who choose to add more score requests. And in terms of timeline for taking TOEFL retakers versus non-retakers, I think in the New York Times and also many other channels has reported, the impact of retaking of standardized tests, especially for admission purpose. And this is also something we are interested in. It seems like the retakers typically they underperform compared to those who took the test only one time. And 88 versus 90 out of the scale of 120. And we also found that about half the students in a particular year, they were retakers, and which took about 57% of all testing in one particular year, which means, there are also a slight slice of students who took the test more than 2 times. We also look at, this is another way to look at the data, that we'll look at the distribution of gain or loss between the 2 times of anyone who took the test twice only, and between the 2 times, this is a score difference. On average, they were able to increase by close to 6 points out of 120. But as you can see, the distribution is a little bit tilted towards the 5-point value. But they do see students, their scores actually decrease, which for various kind of reasons. To also look into the issue of, when you took the test multiple times and sending scores each time, do we have any confidence level that, each time when you try to decide which schools to apply to, is there anything like stable there, or are your intention changing with test taking experience? And so in this case, we focus on the 2-time test takers only. And we found that between the 2 times, the choice of schools did not change too much, at least not dramatically different. For example, if we use the 1st-time test taking, the intended institution as a reference point, half of them are the same when you took the 2nd time, in terms of the number of institution and also the exact name of the institution who intend to apply. And if we use the 2nd time as a reference point, about slightly more than 1/3 of the students have exactly the same kind of institution they want to send scores to. And we also look into the retaking behavior by country. And as you can see, in the right side table, the 2nd column, the percent of retakers across country varies from 6% single digit to 57% in China. And you can see that, in East Asian countries where the educational resources are more competitive, China, South Korea, Japan, and also Taiwan, you see close to or more than half of the students are retaking the test. And this also can be reflected by the number of retake per student or number of times retaker. And you can see that, for those countries who have more proportion of students retake the test, they also tend to retake more times than those in the other countries, relatively speaking. And we also want to understand, from personal level, institutional level, and country level, what kind of factors are determining or affecting students' application or choice of schools to apply. In this case, the TOEFL data provide us with information that can help us to better understand these factors. And we were hoping to continue this line of research besides the current research. So one thing is that, one hypothesis we can have is that, is the student savvy enough to anchor their applications, intended institutions based on their TOEFL scores, or based on the average TOEFL scores these institutions disclose in their own website. So this is a chart based on the 18 institutions we selected. As you can see, the shape of the all-drive shape seems to have a negative relationship there. That more selective institutions seems to having higher scores on average of all the applicants, even though there are some kind of variations there within the same level of requirement of TOEFL scores. And we also tried some machine learning methods. For example, we tried clustering the institutions and applicants simultaneously. We call it multi-level bi-clustering. We start with a mini cluster of institutions and applicants where they look very, very similar or exactly the same, and we put them in one bucket like these X and Y, and then the right side would be the institutions, and by doing this in an iterative way, we were able to forming some kind of clusters and then try to rebuild some higher level cluster each time. And then after a certain number of iterations, we were able to come up with some smaller number of iterations that could help us to understand how the institutions and the students themselves can kind of interact with each other, and whether there are kind of any structural relationship there, which we believe that this multi-level bi-clustering methods could more computationally efficient than other methods such as matrix factorization. A lot of them has been used in the industry, like the Netflix recommendation system. And this can also help us to accurately define graph distances operationally in an accurate way so that we can quantify the distance between different clusters of students and institutions. And one important feature here is that we could also account for lower level link weights that we can aggregate them across different levels of clusters, and also include different attributes or characteristics of students, like the country of origin or gender, and also the institutional characteristics, for example, the ranking, the admission rate traditionally, and also the diversity indicators of the institution as well. And this algorithm, the multi-level bi-clustering algorithm, could also support some fast update of the bipartite graph, and so that we can compute and update the distances and clustering hierarchy each time when new students is added. So this is just some one conceptual idea, how so in the left side, this could be considered as a number of institutions, and each node where you have a gray square there could be considered as a cluster, and then each line attached to it could be considered as one particular institution type, and then they be grouped together initially, and then regrouped in a higher level, and then regrouped again at another higher level. And on the top part of this chart is, you can think of them as individual students, where they can initially group by the local level individual characteristics, and then doing that in a more iterative way as well. We also have related indices to evaluating how these clustering work in terms of capturing data and recover the key information as reflected by the data metrics. So so far, we have completed the initial exploration, and results seems very encouraging. For example, the clustering results shows that most of the students within the cluster, they tend to apply to institutions within that cluster, much at higher likelihood than those in the different clusters. And this will hopefully help us to uncover a hierarchical structure of institutions, and similarly by students as well, and also provide some real-time preference-based recommendation system similar to something you familiarly see in Amazon and other social media or different industry. And in the future, we would like to build a matching system where we could account for multiple types of outcomes and admission results, enrollment status, and their college success indicators as defined by the institutions. And we also would like to investigate, what kind of impact the tested optional policy on the applications and admissions, especially with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some discussions, we found that, the variations among individual students, as well as those clustered by country, may suggest that, different types of services may need to be provided to address the gaps, and also to improve the efficiency and also the effectiveness of applications and admissions, which is something, not much has been done. There are many agencies of international students funneling them to the United States institutions and universities, but a lot of them is for profit, and that definitely wouldn't be able to adequately address the issue of diversity and fairness and equity issue. And we will try to incorporate students and individuals' attributes when we try to modeling their preferences and also recommendation or matching. And I think more research would definitely be needed, to address these issues. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And we have a question here.
Yes, yes. So the question here from Trevor Laughlin. Were there any links to the TOEFL scores and predictors of success in universities?
Yes, we have a series of research done in terms of how the TOEFL scores could be used to predict the success in universities. But as you can tell that, there are many factors affecting or contributing to college or institutional success once the students are admitted. Language is only one part. If you can think about the domestic US-based education, all of the students, they are, most of them at least, 60, 70, 80% of them are native speakers of English. So one would assume that language is not a barrier there, but even there you see half of them drop out, so. But even with that factors considered for international students, because they're definitely much more selective, either self-selected or selected by the admission process. There are some low-level correlations between the TOEFL language skills scores and the success indicators like first-year GPA or graduation status. And in the long term, they also have some research is done there. And if you could, if you leave your email to me, or you can email me as well, gling@ets.org. I'm happy to connect you with those research. You can also search them into like language testing or assessing writing, those type of journals, and they should have quite a few researches done, published already. And feel free to contact me if you couldn't find them.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating to see all of that data, and yeah, really, really interesting. I think we've come to the end of our time now. So thank you again, and I think we're going to take a short break now.
Thank you.